Go ahead and have a seat, if you will, and we can kick off the Composers Symposium. Welcome all of you this afternoon to St. Mary's Episcopal Cathedral. My name is Richard Townley. I'm going to be the recitals here in about 30 minutes. And joining me for the forum are my friend Dennis Jansen, who transcribed pictures of an exhibition, which is going to be first on the program later this afternoon. And then joining us by Zoom from the East Coast is Peter Sykes. He transcribed the Pulse the Planets that is also on the program this afternoon. I want to let both of these gentlemen talk for a few minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Anything you ever wanted to ask the composer, you can ask them today. Peter, do you want to get us started kind of start off with your process, how you came to, I know you answered this on the radio the other day, so I've already heard the story, but I think it's a great story. So tell us how you came to do this organ arrangement of the planets.
Well, quite simply, I did it on a dare. I was invited to play a recital for the Organ Historical Society, and I was given a town hall style organ in an auditorium, and I was told to take orchestral work that had not yet been transcribed for the organ and make a transcription. And I searched, I said, do you want something impossible like the planets? And the person who was invited said, I dare you. So the jig was up, and I had to do it. And so I didn't really have any experience doing this kind of thing before. I had written music, I had arranged things for choirs, and so, but something like this was starting from scratch. And that I got very lucky in a number of ways. I think that the first way was that not only was there the full score available, sometimes these orchestral works, you can only rent the score, you can't go get it, but this had been published. And also there was an original version of the piece that Holtz had written for 2 piano. And so all the notes of the work were contained in 4 staves of music for right hand, left hand, and 2 pianos. And so it was an easy matter in a way just to decide on what keyboard of the organ, in what octave, and using what stops to play those notes. But then also to figure out how one person could do all of that. And then in the end, my answer was one person cannot. And then the arrangement that I came up with features a third hand for some moments in most of it, but the last movement is 2 players throughout. There was just no way that I could put in all of the notes that are in that last movement. And at the same time, there's always a question of how much do you try to preserve, and how much do you try to put in versus what do you have to leave out, what are you losing, and what are you gaining. I consulted a book which was all about making transcriptions for the organ from the sweet spot in history when it was being done all the time, the early 20s. This book was published in 1921 by an English author. And he said that the chief aim of any transcription is to make the work sound as though it was originally written for what you're transcribing for. So my job was to turn the planets into an organ piece, rather than something that was trying to imitate an orchestra. And so I had a number of guiding principles that just sort of guided me from the beginning. And the first was to honor the organ. Not to do anything that the organ would be unenigmatic, that wouldn't celebrate the organ's sound, and make it sound as though it really was a good idea to do this. The second was to make the music sound good. To really try to find a way of making it plausible, not have any head-scratching moments like, what was that? But to try and have it be something that would be acceptable to the ear. And the third, and least important in a way, was to try and be faithful to the original score. And so there are places where you just have to leave things out or change things, and that the book that I consulted was very helpful in that regard, because it said that organ sound is so complex that one note played on the organ can stand sometimes for 5 or 10 instruments in the orchestra. And so you don't have to replicate the number of notes or the number of parts in order for it to be complete itself. And so that was sort of what I did. And I'll just sort of illustrate one place in particular where in the original orchestration, and it's in the Venus with the second one, there's a melody that is played by a violin way high up there, and it's accompanied by a choir of oboes. And that if you try to play that on a string stop in the organ and the treble, and then the oboes stop with the left hand, it would sound terrible. That's not an idiomatic use of the organ's colors. But what is an idiomatic use of the organ's colors is a harmonic flute way up in the sky, and that you use accompany that with the celeste registers from the swelling modulating string stops. And so that's an organ sound. And I dare say that moment is as beautiful on the organ version as it is in the orchestral version, even though it could be more different.
Thank you. Dennis, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to pictures in the exhibition? I think you mentioned earlier, somewhat influenced by the symphonic voices that are on this instrument here, so you can explain to our people. And also our people on the internet, I forgot to welcome you. You're welcome. Maybe you could address that.
Sure. The Pictures at an Exhibition is one of Mussorgsky's most well-known piece. He wrote it for piano solo. A little history on all of this. His friend Hartmann was an artist and an architect, and really was renowned at the time. Died at the age of 36, and they were good friends, and Mussorgsky really was heartbroken because of this. And following Hartmann's death, one of the art societies, and in particular one gentleman, did an exhibit of his works, and they had over 400 of his pieces of art and architecture, drawings, line drawings, all on display. Hartmann did a lot of traveling, so as we go through some of the pictures that were chosen, you will see some of them are from something in Italy, something in France. So after the exhibit, and Hartmann was already, this was because he had passed away, that his work actually got displayed. They had collected for the exhibit private donors to come in and let them use their works, some that were in his collection, and a couple of them from Mussorgsky himself. So following that, Mussorgsky sort of went into just a depression and really decided, you know what, I need to remember my friend somehow. And that's when he came up with the idea of doing this suite for piano. So it really depicts 10 different pictures that were exhibited there. We still, to this day, have accounted for at least 6, perhaps 7. So they'll be displayed later, along with some that were either by Hartmann or suggest what was the display. With all of this, the piece was not published until after Mussorgsky died. So we actually never heard it in any performance. It never caught on until years later in 1922 when Ravel orchestrated. And it caught on everywhere. And that really is, I think, where all of us probably have heard the first time is at some concert. It's still in great use. Along the way, there are quite a few other orchestrations, including Stokowski, who did one for the Disney sets and all of the Fantasia things. So that also got to work out. But still, it's not a tremendous piece that's done with a lot in the piano world. I think there's a little bit of resurgence right now again, so you might be able to catch the original version. With all that said, taking a piano piece, and it's been orchestrated and better known as the orchestral, I really went back to the original piano pieces to transcribe the piano pieces to the organ. I'm certainly familiar with a number of the orchestrations. Interestingly enough, they leave out movements, they change keys of movements, they reorder them. So I wanted to go back, because really Mussorgsky thought of this, planned the keys and all of the movements, how they're going. So there's these promenades where he's walking in the art gallery to different photos. And so the individual pieces that he wrote about the really is about not the art visual, but the activities that are being displayed. So they're very vibrant and lively pieces. Then he walks to the next one. Sometimes he reflects on his friend, or morose, all sorts of different things. So dealing with the pictures, they were really capturing his personal feelings about his friends and the vivaciousness of the art. Some of the things then that I worked with in taking piano keys to the organ are quite different because I had open access to the sounds on the organ. But think about a piano as wonderful resonance and things that it has. It's still a piano no matter what you do, the sound. So I tried to capture the essence of the music and that vitality. So lots of registrations because the colors are so important, and you don't get the nuance on the organ by playing the same thing, same sound differently, but you actually possibilities of orchestral changes. And the organ here has so many wonderful orchestral symphonic organ stops and individual colors that I had that in my ear when I wanted to transcribe this. It happened to be sort of around that COVID time that I had started the project and actually completed it just after that. So I had did a lot of it in my ear without testing it on the organ. I was able to get back in here and play through it and make my final edits and appendices. But it really is looking at the score and, as Peter was saying, capturing what will the organ sound best with this music. So I think that really was the inspiration, is first of all, the wonderful music, the vivaciousness of it, and the possibilities of the organ expressing it.
It was certainly not a one-to-one correspondence of Ravel put an oboe here, so put an oboe there.
Yes, yeah, and really trying to reinterpret the original score.
Hello? We would like to open up to questions from the audience. If any of you have a question for Peter or for Dennis, whoever wanted to ask a composer a question, don't be shy. This is your big opportunity. Here we go.
All right, so my question is regarding the planets. For Gustav Holst, did he originally base this piece of music on the actual celestial objects, the planets, or on the Roman gods that the planets are named after? And also I was wondering why he chose not to include Earth in the planets.
Good. So the question, Peter, is why isn't Earth included? And the other thing is, was it the Roman gods, was it the planets themselves, or what inspired Holst?
And Peter, that's my son who runs the planetarium show. That's why he asked.
Oh, wonderful. I know that there was a reason that Holmes left Earth out. Maybe there was too much to say or not enough to say in terms of depicting that planet. I do know that his initial attraction to the subject came through astrology. And so even though the names of the Roman gods are used, and of course their attributes, Mars being the ring of war, Venus the ring of love, and so forth there, I think it's more of a astrological exploration, and also just in a way just a fantasy around each one of the planets in order to make it sweet.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question for Dennis or for Peter? Anything you ever wanted to ask the composer?
This question is for Peter. You mentioned that the golden age of transcribing symphonies or orchestral pieces into organ, or for the organ, was the early 1920s. And I'm just curious why that happened. What were the forces at work there that makes the 20s that time for transcriptions to organ?
But Peter, could you talk a little more about the heyday of the organ and transcriptions, and the instruments, the lines, and how that related to biology?
Sure. Well, I mean, we're in a very fortunate position now that there are many, many orchestras, not only in the major cities, but in any city, in order to have some kind of cultural way, has a local orchestra. There are high school orchestras, and then in the early 20th century, that was not so. There were really only orchestras to be found in the major cities, and that the hearing was prohibitively expensive. And at the same time, back then, they did not have CDs or Spotify or anything like that. They had Victrolas, and then to listen to an orchestra playing through, for one thing, how do you get the sound of an orchestra through that little funnel so that they can make a 78 record on it? And so mostly early 70s, 80s were solo music, were songs or bands, things that were not orchestra because it was very difficult to record. So the obvious solution was to find an organ in a big town hall that then could be played by one person so that they could hear this music, which was so well known, but opportunities to hear it were very rare. And so I think that the idea of orchestral transcriptions on the organ fit a cultural need of the time, which we don't have anymore. Now that we can listen to anything we want at any time, there's no point. It's kind of an archaeological exercise to make an orchestral transcription of the organ today. But I also thought of it as a learning procedure, just as Bach, when he transcribed all the string concertos to the organ. What can you learn about the music? What can you learn about the nature of organs and sound? And so that was sort of a motivation for me in terms of finding out ways of honoring both the original and the organ transcription. And I actually inadvertently got tremendously lucky in doing this, because Holst, by heart, was a composer for wind instruments. He wrote so much music for band and for wind ensembles, and that the predominant musical material of the planets is covered by the winds, not the string. And so that translates to the organ superbly well. Far better, in my mind, than most transcriptions of Wagner for the organ, which are really all string. And that Wagner transcriptions of the organ, to me, sound really clunky and kind of crude and give the whole genre a bad name. But Holst is like, it fits it like a glove. And I could not really have foreseen that. It's just that all of a sudden, when I was playing these notes on the organ, it sounded great. It came to life, and it really sort of worked in a way that I could not have foreseen. But then realizing that Holst orchestrated it for wind, it's like, okay, that makes sense. A wind instrument being transcribed for a wind instrument.
Thank you. So Peter, is this what you were best known for, this transcription of the planets?
Well, I have a very bifurcated musical life. Not only do I play the organ, but I also play the harpsichord. And then I have recorded the planets on the organ, but I've also recorded Bach's partitas on the harpsichord. I've recorded a bunch of things on a clavichord recording. And so in my early music life, people know me for that. And in my later organ music life, I'm known for the planets. And people can't wrap their heads around the fact that the same person would do both things. But I'm just greedy. I just like music.
Thank you. Dennis, how many different transcriptions have you done? 100? 200? 1,000?
Maybe not that many transcriptions. There are at least, I think, 15 to 20 in Wayne's catalog of big orchestral works and all sorts of things. There's a few more in the making to come out next year, so we keep at it. Transcriptions really were popular, as Peter said, really at the turn of the last century. The idea was of town hall organs and presenting music to people that would never be able to hear symphonic works or in the original form. So what's happened in really the last 20 years, 25 years, your Planets was published in the late 1990s. Wasn't that when you did it here?
So, 30 years ago this fall.
Yeah, okay. So that really was probably helping with the turning point, because now at national conventions where you perform that also, it really became popular to start to do transcriptions. And the other thing is they started repairing and rebuilding these wonderful old symphonic organs that now are over 100 years old in unusable, a lot of them, or in disrepair. And then there was this great interest in revival. So the transcriptions have started to flourish. And the other wonderful thing is there's a lot of young organists out there who are really excited about playing. And so they get performed.
Absolutely. We have time. No, I got all the time. Everyone here could ask a question in the amount of time.
Okay, this is for Dennis, and first I want to put in a little plug. I played The Lord is My Shepherd this morning at my church, and it was very well received. That was a beautiful piece. Thank you. Okay, there is a piano here, and you started from the original piano version. I would love to hear an excerpt of anything that you play kind of off the top of your head at the piano, and then show us the transcribed version that you developed later. Would it be possible for you to do that?
The question is, play some of the piano piece first and then do some of the transcriptions. I think that would be a wonderful extended, just what we're doing here. It needs to be planned with a little more time and availability. But that would be a good in really looking at the original music and transcribing and how I did something. Absolutely. Get something out of that.
You put him on the spot. Also, these two guys have the same publisher. Do you want to make a plug for your publisher?
Yeah, Wayne Leopold Editions has really come to the forefront as being the premier organ resource for any organists out there. There's a bi-monthly magazine that is published that goes out to organists all around the world, and it is strictly, he publishes organ music, caliber for churches, everyday organists, accomplished artists, and in all kinds of genre. I'm one of the house composers. I talk to Rain about every other week. He gives me a call. We need this for the next project and everything else. But it's with Wayne Leopold Editions. Peter, would you like to add anything about Wayne?
Wayne is an immense force for good in the organ world. That what he has created in terms of resources, not only for, as you say, for professional organists, but also his interest in pedagogy, in getting young people interested in playing the organ, making it possible for them to learn well what the organ can do from an early age. I think is really a fantastic resource. He's also a great guy.
So, Peter, I think you mentioned that you recorded the planets in the 1990s. How many times have you performed it and where?
Oh my goodness. Well, I don't keep a list, or I maybe should have. I can say that I played it on organs that had 150 stops and 25. The most recent one was on an organ that had only 25 stops, but it was made by a player who was well known for orchestral design, and that it was a very flexible instrument that had a lot of colors. The only thing it didn't have, unfortunately, because it was so small, was one stop that was almost inaudible. You need that for the end of the whole suite. The choir strings were just too loud. I have to say that was the main problem I had with it. But I've also played it on a large 5-manual tracker organ, St. Ignatius Loyola in New York City. I've played it on organs that would perhaps be considered inappropriate, like more Baroque style. The only kind of organ that I have refused to play it on, because it really, you might think, well, this would be a natural thing, but the only kind that I really don't think it would work is a theater organ. I think that those kind of organs really are not meant to play serious music. I think that this would not work.
Have you had to train a new player too every time you go on tour with it?
I'm happy to say that I've had the same partner for all the performances. And so that was, it makes it easy. I would be very afraid at this point to find someone new to do it. And then I will say that there are moments where I think, is this going to be the last time I do it? It's been a good run. And I will say that my partner who recorded it with me, with whom I played it very many times, musical partner, was kind of angry when I published it through Voyage and said, now other people can play it, you're not going to ask other person, a man in Germany, has re-recorded it. He made another recording of the same piece using his own ideas and instruments. That's fascinating to me because I think that what surprised me about it, I'll just say briefly, is that he was a lot more faithful to the notes in the score than I ever have been. One of the things about transcription is that in a way, it's just a set of recommendations. You can decide to play something else, you can thin it out, you can add more notes, you can play it up an octave, and he plays it like he's reading the Bible. Every note is there. So if you want to hear that as a contradistinction to my recording and any of the performances, it's an interesting contrast.
I'll keep that in mind. Thank you to Peter Sykes for joining us on Zoom, and thank you to Dennis, of course, being here in person. I need to go get into character, so that will be the end of the lecture, and we'll start in about 5 minutes. Thank you all.